Concerning the economically unstable times that we live in, it is a great idea to convert some of your savings into real money. Now, there is a big difference between real money and what we call money, which is actually just currency. So our dollar is currency, which fluctuates. Real money, on the other hand, like silver, for example, is a store of value over time. The best way to think of it is like this. If you had saved $1,000 in cash back in the late 60s, the late 1960s, that $1,000 would still be $1,000 technically, but it would buy you significantly less today due to inflation. Now, if you had saved that same $1,000 in silver back in the 1960s, today it would be worth around $28,000. So one of the best ways to protect your purchasing power is in real money, more specifically, silver. You can buy and have the metal shipped discreetly to your door, and what most people don't know is that you can actually convert your IRA or even a 401k into physical silver rather than having all of your life savings tied up in the paper fiat system, which is subject to hyperinflation. Go to dailyrenegade.com and click on the Cornerstone Assets Metals banner. This is the only company that I personally trust with this kind of thing. Click on that and sign up to get your free silver report today. One of the financial experts will speak with you to find out the best way to protect your savings going forward in these uncertain times. Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Josh Peck. Tonight, we have a very special episode for you. We are welcoming back to the show Gary Wayne, author of The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Plan to Enslave Humankind, and The Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, How Understanding Prehistory and Giants Helps Define End-Time Prophecy. And that second book will be the topic of tonight's show. We had him on a few weeks ago, and tonight we're going to continue our conversation going through his amazing new book. Glad to have you back on, Gary. How are you doing?
Doing very well, and thank you for inviting me back to your show, and getting so excited as we get closer to the actual receiving of the book. I was talking to the publisher last week, and in the process that happens today, it's got to go through a queue, then it goes through a queue at the printers, but it's actually being printed right now, so definitely going to be beating that March 12th release date by a fair bit. And I'm actually hoping, and I'm always optimistic, but within a couple of weeks I'll have books and all of the pre-orders, whether it's with me through my website or through Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever. They'll be shipping those sooner than the actual advertised release date. I would think that they would. And it was really nice, and it shows that we're really close. I saw yesterday when I checked on Amazon is that the digital Kindle version is now up for book 2 as well for pre-order. So they like to time that with the arrival of the books. So I think that is getting, another sign that it's getting closer.
Oh, perfect. Well, if people do want to pre-order, where do they go to do that?
Well, the easiest place to go to is to my website. That's at the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's the number 6conspiracy.com. And on the website, if you want to pre-order, you can go to the Buy Now page, and you're going to get an option for book 1 or book 2. And if you wanted to buy book 1, you go to book 1. You want to pre-order for book 2, go to book 2. And on that page, if you want to get a signed copy and pre-order, then there's a page for Canada, there's a page for the US, and there's a page for the rest of the world, and that's for both books as well. And you also have links off of those buy page and the front page over to the Kindle. I don't have my Kindle link up yet for the new book, but I'm hoping to have that up this week, but it is for the other books. We have a Kindle link to go to Amazon. You also have an Amazon.com link, an Amazon.ca link, and a BarnesandNoble.com link, and that takes you right to the book to place your order if that's the way you would like to go. And I'm fine either way. The signed copies I do with pleasure, and just love it when I receive an order, but it's good either way. I get supported. I get a royalty off of the books, and so it's fine. So whichever way people want to
support me by purchasing one of my books.
Fantastic, and I highly suggest everybody go do that. Both books are fantastic. From what I read of the second book, it's absolutely phenomenal. And when you were here last, we went through some of the highlights of the first two sections of your newest book. And obviously, we didn't get to everything because I want people to pick up your book. I don't want to give everything away here. But today, I figure let's hit the ground running and pick up where we left off. Section 3 is titled The Human Hybrid Canaanite Confederacy, and it opens with Chapter 22, Nimrod and Babel City. Who is Nimrod, and what things did you discover when researching for this chapter?
Yeah, Nimrod, what I learned after writing book 1 was a figure that is hotly contested within the Christian genre and outside the Christian belief. And similar kinds of a story for both. The occult versions or the polytheist versions can provide a lot more detail as to some of his exploits, because we get a very, very limited accounting of Nimrod as he's associated with Babel and the founder of Babel in Genesis 10 and Genesis 11, and that he's the one who leads the first rebellion after the flood. He's an Antichrist archetype figure for the end time, and he has a religion that he imposes as well and leads people away from God. And so these are two key words, Babel and Nimrod, when we want to understand the end time, because Nimrod, as being an Antichrist figure, we can learn a lot of details of what he did as to what happened in the end time. And Babel is the Hebrew source word for Babylon, as it shows up in the New Testament, and the Babylon religion. So it's the same religion. It's going to be that same mystical religion and the Enochian mysticism that I talk about in book 1. So in book 2, what I'm talking about now is just sort of dealing with the aspect a little bit more of, was he Nephilim, was he Rephaim, was he human, was he a hybrid? And we don't get his mother, but we get his father. And by sort of inference, and he became Chalal or Halal, he became a mighty one or a Gibberim, but not necessarily a giant. And so I sort of walk through that sort of aspect for people. And then what I do is I bring in the Septuagint, and I do in limited ways. It's an interesting Old Testament parallel account, but it has a lot of inconsistencies and inaccuracies, and one of the reasons why it wasn't used for a core source for the KJV Bible on the printing was because it was just thought to be a little bit too unreliable, but they did use it for reference. And when it talks about Nimrod in the Septuagint, we're told a little bit more as to what this mighty one was like, or a mighty one before God and a mighty hunter. And that's, again, the Hebrew word Gibor or Gibberim. And so in understanding that the Septuagint has a Greek biases to it, it's translated from Hebrew into Greek, and they describe Nimrod as being a giant and earning his reputation on fighting against the giants, which is really kind of enlightening. I mean, we're told he's a mighty warrior, a mighty one, a mighty hunter, but you have to sort of infer who's he fighting against if all of the Noahites are there. He's either fighting amongst each other, which in some of the accounts, and particularly Jewish legend, there's a war before he takes power, so amongst the various factions. But that's not enough to raise him to a level of this mythical character, not mythical, but legendary character. And so he's fighting against a group of people that are probably by the Jewish people of the, as it came down through the history, they sort of understood the context of this, that the giants as they're described, and as I go through this book, I describe them as the aboriginals to the lands that after Babel, people moved into and lived amongst. So if they were in those lands before Babel, that means the giants either survived the flood or they were recreated again after the flood. And these are the people that Nimrod is earning his reputation against. These are the people who he's building the city, which implies high walls and towers and protection. And he's going to build the tower for a statement to them as to which God he's following, which is now going to be their gods, and to the God in heaven. And so it's an important sort of segue into section 3, because I'm going to be talking about hybrids in section 3. Hybrid humans and giants, not as in hybrids as in angelic being and humans. There's two groups. There's a smaller giant and a larger giant. And the hybrids are the smaller giants. And so Nimrod is the source of the dynasties in Sumer after Babel. He actually intermarries with the peoples. There's a people there that are called the Elamites. And these are different than the eponymous name and the patriarchal name coming from Elam. I think it's adopted or changed to that name because that goes back to the Hebrew olam, as in ancient, and ancient peoples of the East. And so it goes to aboriginals, and and Nimrod intermarried with these aboriginals. It would be the same as the Cadmonim. We would know them as the Cadmonites. It means Eastern and ancient. It would be probably the same groups of people as the Cadmonites that were settling in the Mesopotamian area. And he intermarries with daughters or females of these giants to create a hybrid dynasty. So as you get his dynasty that comes downstream, you have Nimrod, which is the Sumerian En-Murakar, and Murakar, depending on which language you're going to translate that from, and there's about 3 different spellings for it. And he's third generation like Nimrod, and he has a Babel story around him in Sumeria as well, and I cover that off in the first book. But that's the dynasty that includes Erech, as one of the cities that Nimrod founds. That's the city of Erech of King Lugalbanda, meaning giant king, and part of the epic heroes of Erech. And he is going to have a son through a female or a mother goddess, fertility goddess of Sumeria named Nin. And that's going to produce Gilgamesh. And so there's a succession, and it starts building that sort of succession of those giants that's going to go down to the War of Giants. In those various successions of the empires, and the War of Giants would be the the third dynasty that would take over the Lugalbanda Gilgamesh dynasty, but includes the same cities. And so we have that sort of interplay that's going on that's important for history and for the interaction of giants at that time and throughout our history with the giants. So I covered Nimrod in ways that haven't, I don't think, been discussed yet, and put it into a historical context and biblical chronology for after the flood that dovetails perfectly into the details of the Bible. And it sets up the hybrid nations, as he's probably one of the first ones to set up these hybrid nations.
Yeah, definitely. And when looking at the Bible, Genesis is full of tribes, but there's not typically a lot of information about them, and you go through quite a few in your book. Let's start with the Anakim. Who are the Anakim, and what makes a patriarch-less nation unique?
Yeah. And that's a perfect sort of distinction. So you see the word Anak in most of the English translations. You see Anakite, and I think one time there might be Anakim as it's translated. And so I am is typically the male plural in Hebrew. So Gibbor's the singular version, Gibborim is the male plural. Gibborah, 1369 versus 1368 of Gibor Gibborim is the female aspect, and you can denote that as a female denotion, as a gender, or you could as in action or in power. So when you see Gibor transferred as mighty, or translated as mighty, like for the mighty strength of God, that would, you could translate that as Gibor, depending on how the application is. But typically when that power is being used, it's going to be a AH plural. So just a little bit of nuance on the words there. So Anakite, Anakim, they're in Hebrew it's basically Anaki, and transliterated with the plural as Anakim. And they are a nation that's not listed in the Table of Nations in 1 Chronicles or Genesis 10. And so what we're told is after the flood, that all of the nations descend out of the 70 patriarchs listed in Genesis 10 and 1 Chronicles, and also counted as the same number as the sons of Jacob born in Egypt. But that's more of a prophetic aspect of that dual prophecy, and also numbered as the 70 nations. So it's a standard that was born to Adam before the flood for the number of nations. So it's a standard number of nations, but the Anakim are not in there. So where do they come from? And that's the key question there. And so in the book of Joshua, we're actually told who the patriarch is. And that's Arba, as in Kiriath Arba, the older name for Hebron, where Sheshai, Ahiham, and Talmai, Anakim kings, and Numbers 13 are described as ruling from. And they show up also in other passages in the books. So if they're not in the Table of Nations, then they're probably not humans. So who are they? So, and who is Arba? So they're described as giants in Numbers 13:33, which is the embellished, some people call it the evil part of the report, which is trying to scare Israel. And that word that we saw, the giants, the children of Anak, these are the children, or the Anak are the children of giants. That word giant goes back to the Hebrew word Nephil or Nephilim. That's used in Genesis 6:4. So Nephilim is only used 3 times in the Old Testament. Once in Genesis 6:4, twice in Numbers 13:33. All the other times, except for once in the book of Joshua, where you have a giant translation, which comes from Gibborim, the Hebrew word is going to be Rapha for giant. So they're using a different word and they're trying to scare the Israelites that these are like the Nephilim, or as big and powerful and terrible. These are a different kind of giant, and they're not quite as big, but they're still giants. And so we know that they are giants not only from that embellishment as Nephilim, but they're described as giants in Deuteronomy 2, where it lists other giants in the lands that Israel are going to take. And giant is the Hebrew word Rapha, and Rephaim is the male plural. And so the Anakim are Rephaim, or a kind of Rephaim, and the patriarch is Arba. Rapha is also a tribe of giants. And Rephaim, as it shows up as a tribe in Genesis 14 and Genesis 15, and Genesis 15 is part of the mighty 7 of the mighty 10, where the Cadmonim are also listed in the lands promised to Abraham and his descendants in the covenant that's coming. This is another tribe that doesn't come out of the Table of Nations. So what we learn from this is that the patriarchs for the giant tribes aren't listed in the Table of Nations because they don't descend from Noah. Now, to create these giants, and before Babel, and to be the aboriginals that the Babel people will migrate and move in and live amongst, they have to be born before, and that's also helps to explain who Nimrod is gaining his reputation against. That they're there and warring against the humans at that time. And so they're going to need daughters. And you have a very important incident that happens right after the ark lands on Ararat, which means cursed or cursed. And it's named aptly for the curse of Ham, for, depending on how you want to translate that, violating Ham in a sexual way and or his wife. I think it implies Ham based on the wording, but you could translate that either way. But there's a curse that is placed on Ham, but it doesn't pass on to Ham, and it doesn't pass on to most of his descendants, just one. It's Canaan. And so it's the Canaanites that are going to say, hey, we're not going to take this curse, and they're going to be the ones that are going to squat in the land with the Rephaim after Babel to intermarry with the giants. But more importantly, they're the ones who are going to provide the daughters to the gods ruling from the council of gods after the flood, the offspring gods, the Baalim, to provide daughters to these gods, and maybe even males to the female goddesses, because in the Ugaritic text, for example, it's not biblical, but they are the creators of the Rephaim. And they're doing fertility rituals to bring them back, because they've already gone to the pit prison for their crimes, just like their parents' God did before the flood, because they have a fertility issue. And so they're praying for not only Baal to come back, but also Ashtaroth. So it's the inference is they would like both of them to create giants, because their numbers are dwindling, and that both of them produced giants. So you would presume then that Canaan provided sons and daughters by that inference. And that's how the Rephaim show up after the flood from a second incursion. And so in the Table of Nations, we get the Canaanites listed. There's 12 tribes, but only 3 have a patriarch. That's Canaan, Sidon, and Heth. The rest are a family or a name, and you get like the Amorites, you get the Hivites, you get the Arkites, the Sinites, but they don't get a patriarch for them. And they're the only 9 in the 70 that don't have a patriarch. That's very odd. And that Hebrew word is like mishpacha, which can mean a family, yes, but a family is in a kind of being, as in a species. So this is a different kind of patriarch that's a different kind of species than what Heth or Sidon are. And by implication, Canaan, Sidon, and Heth, from what I said before, likely intermarried with female giants as well to create their hybrid nation, hybrid Rephaim. So now you got those ones being listed as hybrids because they have a patriarch that comes from Noah, but the females that intermarried with the male gods, they're not listed because they have a patriarchal Rephaim, and that they're going to take their name eponymously or named after to sort of reflect part of that. So like Jebus or Yebus would be the patriarch for the Jebusites that controlled Jerusalem up till the time of King David. And so you can trace through different methodologies the patriarchal name of that giant that started those 9 patriarchless tribes. And so the Canaanites and the Amorites are described as hybrids in other nations. They have names for them, and one of the names comes out of two different sources out of the Egyptian records, including the execration text, as the Shazu. And what they show amongst the Shazu is that they lived amongst the Ayakim, or the Ayaki, which is just sort of putting a different order of the suffix of the plural. This is the Anakim, and these are kings. But you have Amorite and Canaanite kings living also amongst the Anakim giants, as they're sort of understood in the execration text. And so they were 7 to 9 feet tall, the hybrid giant humans. And so where you have those patriarchless giants, or tribes, those are the hybrids of Canaan that were living in the land amongst various tribes of the Rephaim. And we get an example of this happening in terms of what Nimrod would have done or what Canaan, Seth and not Seth, but Heth and Sidon did, as well as their daughters, with an incident that's outside of the Table of Nations and almost like an addendum to it. It's included at the end of the Table of Nations in First Chronicles, but it is also shown in Genesis and Genesis 36. It's with the Dukes of Seir, the Horim of Seir. We know Horim are giants from, again, Deuteronomy 2, where it says they're giants, and that's Repha, singular, Rephaim, plural. And so Seir is one of these dukes. He's not the patriarch. And I explain who the patriarch of the Horim are in the Bible, in my book as well. But Seir has a daughter as a giant, and it's a purebred Horim giant named Timnah. And Timnah marries Eliphaz, daughter of Eliphaz, son of Esau, brother to Jacob. And so you have a new dynasty here started with a rare female giant, and that's the source to their fertility issue after the flood, is that they can't produce enough females. And so in the occult and in the royal mythos, if you're going to start a new dynasty, you need a pure-blood fairy matriarchal bloodline to intermarry with another powerful, what they would call dragon bloodline, but in this case, even better for them, a bloodline that comes from Abraham linked to the covenant. And so that word duke is the Hebrew word aleph, which is the term that connects into the elf or the fairy matriarchal bloodlines. And there'll be 12 of these tribes that come out of Edom. That's the rival to the 12 tribes of Israel from the polytheist version. So we need to understand that there's two different kinds of giants. And what I do in the first two chapters of section 3 is start to explain that concept in detail so that we can then get into looking at each of the patriarchless tribes, how we know who the patriarch is, where they lived, and how they're going to impact Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, and it's so fascinating that, when we read just through the Bible and just get these names, that there's actually like a rich history of what all of these are. And I think you, more than anybody else, has done just such an excellent job of pulling all that information together into something that's easy to understand and comprehensive for the rest of us. We have so much more to talk about in the members only section, specifically the post-Diluvian Rephaim world order. And for all of you out there, Gary mentioned something about an elven bloodline. We're going to have to ask Gary about that. So if you want full access, head on over right now to dailyrenegade.com and get a membership. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year. And I suggest getting the year if you can, because it's cheaper in the long run. You essentially get 2 months for free. That is dailyrenegade.com, where members also get early access to all of our videos, and we will continue the conversation over there. Also, for people watching, we have scheduled 2 more interviews with Gary in the next couple of months to go through some more of his books. So make sure you subscribe to this channel, click the bell so you can turn on all notifications so you'll be made aware when we do that. And yes, again, we will continue the conversation over at dailyrenegade.com. So for everyone viewing for free, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure to check out Gary Wayne at Genesis 6, that's the number 6, Genesis6conspiracy.com. And you'll find a wealth of resources there, including his new book. Members watching on the website, hold on the line for the rest. And for everyone watching for free, thank you so much. Until next time, take care and God bless.